Warning, this review contains spoilers for the following books. If you haven't seen the videos reviewing them, I suggest you click here to watch them, or better yet, read the books for yourself. Monument 14, Savage Drift, is the conclusion to the trilogy written by Emmy Laybourne. After everything that the first two built up, with the stunning start of the first book and the epic climax of the second, the third book is okay. It's not that I didn't like it, I mean, it's still a good book, but it didn't carry a lot of the weight or had the same momentum that the first two did. Those books were so good that I had to sneak in a few pages at work. Savage Drift didn't have me pleading for more though, and I'll explain why. The story picks up shortly after where the second book ended. The surviving kids from Monument have wound up in refugee camps in Canada, except for one of the kids who died, you'll have to read to find out who, and Josie, who was presumed dead until a newspaper article showed her in a containment camp in Missouri. Nico immediately strikes out to rescue her, with our primary protagonist Dean once again telling the story as it unfolds. At that point, the narrative switches between Dean, traveling with Nico, Astrid, and Jake as they cross the country, and Josie, and the horror she had to endure under the abusive watch of the camp guards. In the second book, it was revealed that Josie was a Type O, who went berserk when exposed to the NORAD chemicals and ran away from the group. The government, in an attempt to contain these potentially dangerous people, locked them away with no apparent interest in ever letting them go. Savage Drift came out in 2014 and was the longest of the three books, and in some ways, that was the problem. While the first two books were quick and exciting, the scenes with Josie narrating started to drone on and repeat themselves. She gets bullied by a guard, harassed by the other prisoners, and thinks about how miserable she is. This might be okay for a few chapters, but after a while, it grew stale. Josie was always kind and motherly in the first two books, so to see this sudden shift almost negates the character that had been built up to this point. Like Josie says in the book, that girl's dead. The other issue I had was that the kids were split up in the book. Of the 13 surviving kids, Savage Drift only focuses on 5 of them. Now, I can see why the author would do something like this. After all, the third book is where things need to start winding down, and considering the long road trip that Dean's group ventures on, taking the younger kids would be a needless risk. The flip side of that, though, is that Josie finds herself a new batch of kids to watch over, and those kids never stand out at all. Hell, I just finished reading the book and I can't even remember how many of them there were, much less anything about their characters. My suggestion is that she should have been paired with one of the other kids from Monument, maybe even someone who wasn't a Type O. Not everyone in the camp was a Type O, and the guards didn't care to differentiate because they were jackasses. This other kid could have kept Josie grounded to who she used to be and could have forced more character growth, as Josie would have to be both nurturer and guardian. Instead, she's just dark and gloomy. Not the best choice there. I've been rather negative on the book so far, so for a change of pace, here's something I did enjoy. I liked the direction that the storyline following Dean went. He and the 3 others rescuing Josie's also had another plotline of protecting the now 7 months pregnant Astrid. Since she was exposed to the NORAD chemicals, the government wants to know what kind of effect they would have on Astrid's baby, so they want to take her away for testing, apparently even if it's against her will. I thought that the Dean half of the book allowed us to see more of Dean growing up, who by now is a largely different person than who he was when we first started in the series. And it was also good to see Dean and Astrid connect as a couple, though there were plenty of moments of doubt. That awkward feeling, wondering if you're good enough for your date or if you were just reaching for something out of your league. Trust me, as someone who went through the same thing in high school, I can completely sympathize with everything Dean goes through, worrying if Astrid really is into him. It wasn't the pregnancy storyline that grabbed my attention so much as seeing what the world was devolving into. The gruesome detail, the pessimistic outlooks, the violent murders, etc. It didn't have the same level of impact as the initial dip into the world in the second book, but then again, it wasn't supposed to. Still, Dean and company had to make some difficult choices, and Dean and Astrid's relationship became strained, only to be repaired later on. Now, this was a little repetitive too, since the strain/repair cycle resurfaced every few chapters, but it wasn't as bad as with Josie's chapters. Something perhaps a bit more controversial that I could talk about was the series' take on rape. Rape is obviously a terrible thing, and the series never highlights it as anything else, and including it the way the books did felt like a stark reminder that this really is how horrible the world has become. We see random murders and shrug those off, but we see one 14-year-old getting felt up in the third book, and the moment is instantly nauseating. The scene isn't just used to paint the rapist as evil, but also highlighted the de-evolution of society in a way that assault and murder just can't. This was also used to great effect in the first book when the molester who got into the store started off as friendly and sociable. That scene also serves as a warning to young women about the dangers of being too trusting. What I really liked is that you could totally see the scene coming, but when it did, it still felt like a punch to the gut. Feel free to disagree with me, but that's just how I felt. Very little happens in about half of this book, unlike the first two in the series. As much as I've bashed it though, there were a lot of moments that I liked, especially in the ending. The ending itself wrapped up nicely, though maybe a little too conveniently. Good moments did pop up more times than not. Dean, Nico, Astrid, and Jake played off each other well, and that was enough to keep me invested. And there were plenty of moments that I think would look great in film, so if the movies manage to complete the series, we should get some kick-ass scenes. Still, it was a little disappointing to read after how much I loved the first two books. Overall, I didn't have a bad time with the book. Monument 14, Savage Drift, is still pretty good. Not a bad time to be had, for sure. But those were my thoughts. Have you read the book? What did you think? If not, do you want to read it now? Comment below and stay tuned for more.